Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our weekly webinar. My name is Patrick, and I want to thank you for joining us. We try to do this every week. We've been working on a new webinar series, and this week, unlike some of the weeks in the past, we're going to focus on not techniques, but we're going to focus on actually how to build solutions, the process of actually putting together a solution. So it's kind of like an overview. We're going to have a lot of demos, and because we are all about InfoPath, we're going to use InfoPath as our example, but we'll also talk about some other technologies. The same techniques apply, and I'll be going over those in a second. I founded Qdabra Software more than 12 years ago, and we've developed thousands of solutions, and we've come up with a pretty simple process for doing it. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today, is the process that we use internally to build solutions. So if you came and you're looking for specific techniques, we'll show demos. I'm going to actually talk about a lot of different things in this 25-minute webinar today, but we're not going to get really super into the nitty-gritty. If you do have questions, please do log those in chat, and I'd be more than happy to dig into those. But today, really, we're going to talk about 5 things. How to build a business process when you're automating a solution. When you're automating a business process, you're building a solution in SharePoint. And we'll go over and talk about the various pieces of the puzzle that build that solution. And I'll go into depth and talk about, every solution we've built has 5 things in it, right? And we'll talk about those 5 things and explain what they are. I'm also going to give you a little bit of project management. Obviously, many of you are probably professional project management people, and you know how to do your job, and I'm not going to try to tell you that, but we'll talk about how we plan for success both before, during, and after the project. So before would be, when we're preparing for that project, the steps we take to make sure that the start is good. And then, of course, while we're in the process, we want to measure how we're doing, and then at the end, we want to have this continuous improvement. So I'll talk about those things as well. So first off, why this webinar? Well, everyone's trying to build solutions still, and we wanted to provide a very simple slide-based guide for simple projects that gave you some quick checklist, for example, to allow you to know when to say no, for example, and understand the process of building these solutions. So without any further ado, let's talk about what makes a good candidate solution. Not every business process should be automated. And when we think about business processes, let's go back 10 years, 15 years, and think about people that were using paper. And a lot of companies are still using paper. We're talking about streamlining and automating business processes using SharePoint. That's what this topic is about today, and specifically using some technologies in SharePoint, like SharePoint Designer, InfoPath Designer, list-based forms. So that's what we're talking about. So when we're building these solutions, these simple solutions, we want to make sure that there's a well-defined business process. A great example of that is a leave request process. So everyone knows that when they have to take a holiday, they've got to make sure their manager's okay with it. They need to make sure that they're not overlapping with some other critical resource. So that's a good example of a process that everyone has a well-defined business process for taking vacation, because everyone does it, right? In addition, if you don't have automation already there, but you want to make sure that you're not having key people leave at the same time, then obviously that would be a good candidate to automate. If the existing process, for example, is too expensive, if you have a custom solution that someone built in DOS back in the late 80s or 90s or early 2000s, and it's just way too expensive to maintain. Nowadays, we'd say an old Access app, right? Then, and that doesn't have license fee issues, but there are lots of applications out there that have, exorbitant licensing fees. And if you're trying to replace that, that's another good example. If you're trying to, obviously, you have a process that's not giving you good data, and so on. So we've got these reasons. You want to have atomic data that you're collecting, so like a document-centric process, because a lot of these processes need some kind of a sign-off and approval. If you're trying to generate reports but you don't have the data. So these are some criteria that I put together that are key for giving you the thumbs up, yes, this makes sense to automate. Now there are some candidates that you don't want to automate. So if you have a process today that is not broken and there's no pain points, there's no need for reporting, there's no need for metrics, then obviously if it's good enough, leave it be, right? In addition, so many of our customers and our clients, they go off and they try to build applications using SharePoint, and SharePoint's just not a good platform for building an application without, with just tying lists together and tying forms together. But a lot of people try to do it. They try to build CRM applications. Don't do it. It's too complex. There's too many dependencies. I'll talk more about how you can break up these different forms, and the composite could equal part of a CRM application, but you don't want to just go off and start building the kitchen sink with everything in it from the get-go. You want to build it up in pieces so that it's not this huge thing that could fail and leave you in the lurch. Spreadsheets, obviously, use Excel for those. Don't use SharePoint. Don't use InfoPath. Use Excel. Excel lives in SharePoint, so it's there for you. If your team can't agree on deliverables, obviously you're not going to want to take on the project, and so on, right? There's a couple other criteria here. So we want to make sure that we're automating something at the beginning that makes sense to automate. Now we made a decision. We're going to build a solution. What does the solution include? So every solution we've done in the last 12 plus years has included data. And I'll go into detail here and actually describe what this is, and then we're going to get to demos in a minute. But each solution has data, and that's the actual input of the process. It has some appearance, some user interface, user experience, whatever you want to call it. There's a layout, there's a view, a page, an application that shows you where to put the data in. I'm calling that the layout. Some people call that views. That's a very critical component. In addition, every solution is going to have logic. It's going to have rules. It's going to have behavior. And that's going to be like workflow. That could be like rules that are attached to your form that change things dynamically when you're filling out the form. It could be validation. And so each solution is going to have that rules, those logic. And we'll go into detail and talk about that in a second too. And then two other things that people often don't think about, but they always come up, are dashboards to see what the current state of the process is, and reports. And I'll show you demos of a couple examples of those in a minute or two. Reports are not the current state. It's not, you're driving a car, right? You look at the dashboard, you see how fast you're driving. When we talk about reports, we're talking about how we did over the last 10 miles or the last 100 miles. We're not talking about our current state. So the puzzle pieces. So let's talk about all the things that go into these solutions, and let's start off with data. So in a form, in a SharePoint solution today, you've got the main data source, which comprises the data that you're actually collecting. So things like the form name, the due date, the submitter's name, when they want to take the leave request. You've got secondary data that you're pulling into the form. You're pulling in maybe the managers for the person, maybe you pull in and pre-populate the holidays, the days they can't take off. And you've got queries, you're going out, you're pulling data from public web services, REST web services. You're going to figure out what the weather is going to be like on their holiday, right? And then you've got data within the form that's controlling how it looks. And finally, you have to submit the data somewhere, SharePoint list, library, Azure database. So that's the data, right? And let's take a quick look at this. I'm going to show you a form, and it's our statement of work form actually. I'll show you what the data looks like for the statement of work form. So this form here, this is an InfoPath form in the designer, and I'll show you this working in a second with real data, but right now you can see in the designer, this is a relatively large form. We have about 10 views, and we have a data source on the right. And this data source, as you can see, is the main data source, obviously. And we've done a good job of organizing all of this data. And this is kind of like the analogy is, it's like your file cabinet at home. You don't want to just throw everything in there without any kind of folders. You want to have folders, and that's what these orange things are. And you can see we've got a lot of data. We've done a pretty good job of structuring it. Let's take a look at a couple things specifically. We've got work items. So whenever we have a project, this form, as you can imagine, is actually a form that we use to create our project plan. And so it's got work items in it, right? And those work items get typed in. It also has things like milestones. And there's our milestones. So you can see that this is a very complex or very large form, but it's well structured. Now, in addition to the main data source, the form has data connections. So it's actually querying to get information about signatures and milestones and tasks from the system, getting the user information, and then it's submitting the document. So these are secondary data connections, right? I just mentioned those, but I'll talk about them again. And then finally, there are things like when we're doing state, for example, in our form, we may have some state display. So we have a secondary data source here that we don't actually query from SharePoint. We just bake it into the form. This data does not get saved. It just persists within the state of the session, within the process of filling out the form. And you can see here hide tabs is one of these fields. As you can imagine, that's going to store some value that programmatically tells you what tab it's on. So let's take a look at the form in the actual filler here. So here's the form with some actual real live data. I actually created a project estimate for this person in Africa. They haven't contacted us yet. That's why I'm using their example. They contact us a lot. We asked us to do this estimate for them, and so we put this estimate together. It's a relatively large project. Haven't heard from them yet, so I'm demoing their data. Here you can see that I've got the state, though. I can display my views on my right. I've got milestones. I've got resources. I've got details. This is a signable document, right? As you can imagine, those tasks from the first view, they come in here and they become a document that gets printed out in PDF generated and used to sign a document, to create a document that we can sign. And you can see here, I got my signature in there from February 15th. It's still there. And I could re-sign the document if I wanted to change something. So this is a good example of a data, looking at the data in the form. And data is probably the most important part of your solution. But we also saw layout. So when I was showing you the form, I was showing you those different views for project plan, for milestones, and for the details. All of your solutions will have different views. You could have like an administrative section, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a separate view. It could be part of the same view. It could be a header or a footer. If we go back to our form, you'll see that I have it open still. You'll see that we do have a header on the top. We even have a suggestion box, and we have a tagline. We have a footer at the bottom. If I scroll all the way down, you can see I got my footer there, the version of the form, the document ID number, and some terms and conditions, right? So all of your forms are going to have those kinds of things, right? They're going to have common layout sections. Including bodies, including electronic signatures, and in those sections, those bodies, you're going to have additional sections with fields, tables, and layout. So layout is very important. It controls how the form obviously appears. So you're going to have buttons, file attachments, rich text, you name it. All of the controls that you're familiar with, those constitute your layout. Pretty simple. Let's take a look at another example. In fact, I already have this open. Here's my leave request form. I've done a demo of this in the past, and you can see here this is in the browser. This is the 365. This is actually using our Forms Viewer product, which is our replacement for InfoPath. For those of you who are starting to see performance problems, most of you aren't. It's just early days. But in 10 years from now, Microsoft will not be, 10 years or less, Microsoft won't have InfoPath in 365. So if you've got a form that you want to continue using, we've got a tool that will help, and it's free. And that's what's showing this form here. You can see that even though it's in 365, it's a provider-hosted app running in Azure. But what I really want to show isn't that. I just want to show you how the form looks. So the form is optimized for somebody to access it via their phone. So it's got, like an iPhone has, a very, It's got a screen that is wide with large fonts, and this looks really good on a phone. Trust me, we've actually demoed this on phones before. And you can see here that the form, I've already filled it out. So I've filled out my expense, my leave request for tomorrow, put in 8 hours, and I'm going to go visit a customer in Kyushu. And I've submitted the form, and I've reopened it, and you can see that because I'm my own manager, I can approve it now. So I'm going to do that. So this is an example of logic. That approve button, when I click on it, it is actually doing something, and the effect is that it of course sends email to me and it logs the data in SharePoint, but it also hides those buttons because I've already approved it. I don't need to see those buttons again. Let's take a look at the form in the designer, and that's the statement of work form. And we'll get to that form in a second. That's our dashboard demo. So here's the leave request form in the designer. If I'm going too fast, please chat me. I am in Japan, and there's great internet connectivity here today. So last time I did this, it worked really well, so hopefully this time will be the same. So when I clicked approve, you can see that I had these rules on the right. So all of the forms, all of InfoPath forms have the ability to add rules, and here what we're doing is we're setting some status, and then we're submitting the form. So we're setting the status equal to approved. We set the approved by, we then submit the form. And then as a result, because we have this new status, the form changes, and this section then gets hidden. And you can see here it hides it if the form status is not equal to submitted. So when it's approved, it will hide the form, the section here. So that's an example of logic. Now in addition, I'll just go back to my presentation. So logic, there's form rules that set values in the form. There's validation. There's dynamic hide show. There's things like submitting, that's an action. And then of course you can have in-form workflow. So all of these things are examples of logic in your form. Now in addition to your form logic, you've also got things like SharePoint workflows. SharePoint workflows are great for server-side workflow steps, such as sending email, moving items from one folder to another, archiving something, which is the same thing, right? Changing permissions, and even doing things like setting up triggers with the information retention so that you can get a reminder at a week if it hasn't been modified. So that's what SharePoint back-end workflow is good at. But for actually making actions, approving something, doing something in the form, you want to have rules in the form. And those rules can interact with SharePoint by promoting properties. And the SharePoint workflow can then look at the current items data and see what the status is and condition the workflow based on that. Now finally, we also have third-party or external line of business things out there that handle logic. And this is more and more we're seeing this. There's a lot of logic running, for example, with the Facebook bots. You've got servers out there, services that allow you to do natural language parsing of things and give you different expansions of common expressions, so you can check to see if the person really wants the service that your app is providing or your bot is providing. So these web services, typically you access them to submit data, to query the data, to get some information from them. So that's another example of logic. It's not running in the form, it's not running in SharePoint, it's running on your server. It could be an Azure server, could be somebody else's server, right? And we have a couple examples of that. In fact, let me go back though to the, I showed the leave request form in the designer. I showed you the rules on the button. So for the purpose of timeliness here, I want to move on to the dashboards because there's some really interesting stuff here with the dashboards. Let me show you what a dashboard looks like. So we have our customer support form. Here's our customer support form, right? And I can just fill it out. I can say this is a Pry 1 issue. I can type in SharePoint is not responding, and it gives me some options here. Hopefully it'll give me some options. Hello world. And you can see I can, okay, there's a problem. This is, I don't want to really demo this form, but this is how I get a support ticket into the system. Now once I get a support ticket into the system, I can query them. So I can look at all of the support tickets assigned to me, or I can look at everything assigned to my team. And today we have, I think we have a total of 16 active support tickets. and you can see, some of you may even see your name here. Sorry about that. But you can see that we've got information about whether the customer's a VIP, how many hours we spent on the ticket. Now this is actually an InfoPath form. It looks like a web page, but it's just running from SharePoint. You can see Qdabra@sharepoint.com there. This is just on my 365 site. I've just gone off, and let me actually go there again. Just going to go see if I can get there from, well, yeah, I'll just go there to show you that I'm not lying here. So on our main Qdabra@sharepoint.com site, we have a support page, and if I click on the support page, you'll see that there's a button for the support dashboard. If I click on the support dashboard, it's going to launch the dashboard that you just saw in InfoPath, InfoPath Form Services, and it's doing it, filtering it on me. So it's showing me I have 3 tickets assigned to me, and Donald, you've got 2 of them. I need to update my tickets, Donald. So thanks for being here. But I can also look at everyone else's tickets. And what I really want to show you, though, isn't our support process and how we've got a support ticket back from 4.7 that has not been updated. That's terrible. But I want to show you how we did this, the form that we used to create it. And that's the statement of work form. Okay, here it is. So this form is kind of interesting because it doesn't have a data source. So this is an example of a dashboard. And if I go into to the data tab here, and you can see I don't have any fields. This is actually all happening. This form, it queries a database and it displays, it filters data, and this is all done without code. It's like amazing, right? Well, and we only spent like, I don't know, 10 or 20 hours to create this. And it's got a lot of features. But you can see here that when it opens, if I go to form, oh, actually I want to go to the rules. So I need to go to manage rules, and actually I want to go to, and I apologize, I did not. We do have our common library plugin in here, I believe. Actually, we don't. So this is all out of box. Totally out of box, no Q rules, just totally out of box. And so if we go to form load, you'll see what happens when the form loads. It gets the resources, gets my info, fixes the status filter, queries the current user, fixes the dates, checks for VIPs, and so on, right? And then it's going to fill out all this data. And you can see this data is coming from secondary data sources. So if I click on the view, you can see that this data here is actually coming from this QueryDB customer support. So it's querying our database, and it's showing all the customers that match, and then it's just showing that data in the view. InfoPath is like a web page design tool here, and it's nice because unlike SharePoint Designer in InfoPath Designer 2013, you still have the ability to do WYSIWYG designing, right? You lost that with SharePoint Designer in, I think, 2013. They had it in 2010, but no longer. Okay, so let me just, I'm going slow here. This is a lot of stuff to talk about. But I'm going to speed up here. So those are the pieces that go into and actually before I continue, there's the reporting is one more thing that we often talk about. Reporting is really critical. And I'm going to show you a report here. Typically with reporting, you're looking at how things, how often things changed over the course of the last day, the last month, the last week. And you're typically looking at what changed, whether it was written to, submitted, and then what the time period is. So we typically have those 3 different, what we call axes. So the kind of event that happened, whether it was a new form, just a query, maybe it was an update or deletion, the thing that got updated, whether it was a template, a document, or a user might have done something, and then the time period. And so you're typically looking at this to do kind of this dynamic what-if querying, right? Say, hey, look, I want to know how many forms are being submitted a month. And so with our new version of DBXL Admin tool, we've actually added usage stats directly. This is a test site, so it's not super interesting, but you can see here that I can quickly get usage statistics on the test forms I have out here. And I can drill down and kind of look at who's doing what, what the activity is, and I can query on users and so on. So that's an example. Another example would be, for example, an Excel report. Let's say you have support tickets per week, and this is our live data. So that's an example of a report. All of your solutions need them. Okay, so I've gone over all the puzzle pieces, and I'm going a bit slow, but the next thing, once you know what goes in your solution, you need to set yourself up for success. And the way to do that is to create a project plan. You need to gather requirements up front. You need to create a statement of work with a schedule. You need to pull a team together, and you get them to review it, and then present it to your customer, whether that be an internal customer or an external customer, and get sign-off. Now, when we look at projects, we see three different things. We see small, medium, and large. 60% of the solutions we build are small. The rest are medium or large. And if it's larger than 300 fields, just say no. Don't do those solutions. They're not worth it. We've had way too much experience trying to build these apps, these monster, kitchen sink, everything, and it's just not worth it. You want to break things up, and the good metric here is to say, look, you're going to have a lot of forms, a lot of processes that have 50 fields, 1 to 2 views, 3 to 5 data connections. They have a simple approve, reject. That's a small form. A medium form, it ups it a little bit. Now you've got 100 to 50 fields, maybe 75, whatever, but you've got more views, more data connections, more workflow. You're submitting to a document library. This is the typical range of these projects. When we run a project that's small, it's 30 to 60 hours depending on the resource, 2 to 5K. When we do a medium project, it's a little bit longer and it's a little bit more expensive. Large projects, same thing. But they all tend to be within 8 to 16 weeks. We have 1 or 2 projects that will span 2 or 3 quarters, but it's very rare. When you're in the process of delivering the solution, thanks for the question. I'm going to look at the chat afterwards here, but it's good to have you, Michael. Have a good day. And I'm going a little bit over, and I apologize. This is recorded, and we'll get the webinar up. I've got 3 or 4 more slides to go, so just stick with me if you've got a moment or two. But when we're looking at projects, managing success, we always want to look at 3 things. How are we doing on the schedule? How are we doing on our budget? And is the quality up to snuff? Is the customer happy? And typically, you always have this kind of balancing that goes on. You're always shooting for the thing in the middle that is, on budget, on time, and everything's looking great. But you have to be realistic. If something, is not going so well, you might have to spend more time, right? If something is, or more cost, right? So that's just things to keep in mind when you're building a project. When you've built the project, you built the solution, and you're actually done, don't forget, you need to plan for support, just like your health insurance. You're going to need to spend, between 15 and 25% a year. I like to shoot for 20, although sometimes it's like 18. You need to make sure that's in your budget. If you go live and don't have any money left, then you're guaranteed that you're going to have some problems because maintenance will be required at some point. And I like to recommend monthly checkups. You're looking for errors, looking at the logs, the SharePoint error logs. And then if you can put together goals on a quarterly basis, let's improve this, let's reduce the time it takes to do this, and so on, and you can message those out to your constituency, you can build a nice virtuous cycle of improving the process, and the customers will see the improvement, and they'll actually enjoy those updates, the small impact updates that you're making that make it better for them. It's kind of like, you're exercising and bathing and flossing and sleeping. You need to make sure that you take care of yourself, and the same is true for a solution. So 1 or 2 more slides to go. Lastly, one of the reasons you chose SharePoint and InfoPath was because it is an open standard technology. And you also chose Microsoft because they have a 10-year support plan. That's very important. You don't want to go off and choose proprietary data or choose some technology format that may not be around in 10 years. You want stuff that's standard. And that's going to ensure that even when InfoPath goes away, you'll still be able to access the data. And anyway, so my point here is that you want a long life, and you know that your life, the solution's life will come to an end like everything else, but you can extend the length of that and the longevity of the productivity of the system by simply following some best practices, which is open source, open data. Don't write code. Don't build these huge monolithic things, because the larger it is, the harder it falls, right? And so on. And I think that's it. Now we're at Q&A time, and I've got more demos if you want them, but I think I got through some of my demos, most of them. Any questions for me? We are going to take a look at form patterns and examples next week, so we're going to actually look at different kinds of solutions. We looked a little bit at those today, but next week we'll take it a step further, look at simple list data, which we think are covering a large spectrum of the solutions these days. After my webinar, if you didn't catch it 2 weeks ago, we came up with a little bit of a breakthrough. We had a list form that was able to edit data, repeating data, and I'm actually really shocked that after 12 years we actually found something new, but we did, and it was really exciting, and we had a handful of people implement it. So we'll look at simple list data next week again. We'll look at relational parent-child data again, and we'll look at data-driven checklists and surveys. We got lots of examples, and we'll go back to dashboards as well. So questions for me. Greg, thanks for being here, and thanks for the comment. Great report page. Your question is, does it export to Excel easily, and does it print well? That's a great question. I'm just going to write that down, because we're not done fixing all the bugs in that feature, which should be arriving at your doorstep within May sometime. So I'm going to take a note here to file a feature case for you. Hopefully we'll get that done, but the goal is to make the DBXL admin page a lot easier to use and have free reports. And we're really excited about this new 3.1 release. And thank you for that question. Stacy's got a question. Great info. Would love to see this broken down into smaller sessions, so you can. And that's what we're going to do, Stacy. We're going to spend the next few weeks breaking it down into smaller sessions so that we can really go into detail. Thank you for that comment. It's always a challenge here to you want to have information density, but you also want to be relevant. And so we'll be going over the same kind of topics in more detail with more examples in the next few weeks, and maybe throughout the rest of the quarter. Ken's got a comment here. Okay, thanks for that wonderful comment, Ken. Dewey, really interested in the parent-child part. Yeah, we've done other webinars in the past on parent-child. It's very popular. Please check out our webinar list on YouTube. We've got lots of parent-child webinars. Hillary's done them. I've done them. And then Stella, thank you for being here until the end. I think you made a comment earlier that you were wondering when it was going to start. So thank you for pushing me to start 1 minute early today. So your question is, how easy is it to create a timesheet? We've done like 20 of them, and that's a great question, but it's fairly easy. I think that a timesheet is usually between a small and a medium, and more of them are medium-sized. And I mean, we can definitely show timesheets next week. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually add that to our list next week so that we show you some examples, because we've done like 20 of them. And I'll put this as one of the, actually I've got that already here. So I've got the timesheet as one of the examples of the parent-child next week. And I can show you my timesheet right now if you want to stick around. But no, in general, the timesheets are somewhere in the medium range. Sometimes you can get away with the small. Microsoft actually released 2 timesheets as part of InfoPath 2003 back in the day, long, long time ago. They had a detailed one and a simple one, and they're both very simple 20 to 40 hour timesheets, but you can get much more complex. Okay, any other questions? Yes, I will show you, I'll show mine right now if I still have it open. There's my statement of work. Okay, so anyway, thanks everyone for being here. We're going to get the webinar up. I'm going to show Stella my timesheet here in a second. And if I can find it, and just give me 30 seconds here, Stella, and I'll open up my timesheet, which I closed, and I'll show you what mine looks like. Timesheets. I don't have anyone else's in my bucket right now because I've already approved them all for last week, and everyone's doing their timesheets for this week. So this is actually using the filler. We've got a lot of customers using timesheets in the browser. I would say that it's one of the most common patterns that we see out there in terms of forms. And this one, you know, I'm in Japan. It usually is a little bit faster, and we usually don't close them a whole lot. But it is doing quite a bit of stuff on load to pull in all of my projects and so on. And it should show in a second here. With that data, I appreciate your patience. We are moving this into the browser so that we don't have to deal with the network latency. The browser has network latency as well, but yeah, this is pretty bad right now. So let me just wait until this. It's coming. It's coming. Okay, there's my timesheet. So you can see that I filled out my timesheet through Wednesday. It's Thursday, and somebody's made an update to it. I think Hillary's been making some updates to it. So this timesheet's kind of interesting because I can go in here to Thursday and I can go in and say, well, I did the webinar, right? And you can see here that I've got projects listed here. Now I don't have the webinar, but I can select it from my active projects. So every single task and every single statement of work comes in here, and I have some that I use a lot here at the top. And the way this is set up is that, you know, obviously, if we can use the remaining time to control whether we're under or over budget on something. I'm not using it for webinars. I just kind of put in a huge amount. But you can see there that it's actually allowing me to select it from my list of tasks, and then I can type in notes. And if this was a billable project, I could mark it as free, but it's not. So this is a timesheet that automatically calculates the amount of hours. It's got the start and the stop. It is careful about checking the overlap. And you can see here on the top, I've got a quick summary of my billable projects and my non-billable. Got a lot of non-billable work this week. So hopefully that's a great little demo, and we'll show you other timesheets next week. But hopefully that gives you a kind of a sense, Stella, of what we do internally. And like I said, that's important for us because it pulls from our project database. Forms Board is out there. It's a public site that we created using Amazon Web Services about 8-9 years ago. You can actually log into Forms Board and create your own domain, and you can store your forms out here and share them amongst your friends. What you do is you just go to formsboard.com, you just sign up, it's free, and you can store your InfoPath forms out here. We use this for our company business process. We've got all of our documents out here, and you can see I've got customer contact, I've got support, documentation, expense reports. It just provides a nice dashboard that we can drill in and get stuff, and then within this there's some simple reporting. If I drill down further, as you saw, I've only got the one timesheet assigned to me. Great question though, thanks for that. I hope you guys all have a great day, and Forms Board is US-based, Carl. In fact, it's something that we built, so it's running in California right now, I believe. If you want Forms Board for yourself, we can install it for you. We've got several customers that are using it on their own. We don't charge for the actual, there's no license fees, but we do charge for support and for setting it up. And it runs probably anywhere from, you know, $3 to $5K a year to maintain it. But we can set it up on Azure, Amazon Web Service, or on your own SQL box. So if you're interested in Forms Board, please answer that survey, let me know, and we'll get this webinar PowerPoint slide out to you. I'm going to call it a day. I hope you guys have a wonderful one, and I'll be back in Seattle next week. Have a great day. Ciao.